Apache woman was left behind when the wagon train moved on, the rancher said. You'll go with me now. The sun had just begun to rise over the dusty plains, spilling golden light across the rolling hills. A wagon train, slowly moving along the rough trail, stretched as far as the eye could see. Families in tired clothes, children clinging to their parents, and animals laden with supplies made a long, winding line across the landscape. Among them was Island, a young Apache woman whose dark eyes reflected both caution and strength. She had been traveling with the wagon train for several days, seeking safety and shelter after weeks of uncertainty in the open land. Island had always been careful about whom she trusted. Her life had taught her that the world could be both beautiful and cruel, often at the same time. She knew how to find water in hidden streams, how to track animals for food, and how to avoid danger when it was near. But traveling with a wagon train was different. The rhythm of the moving wagons, the voices of strangers, and the ever-present worry of attacks made her tense. She had joined the travelers because it seemed safer than moving alone, yet she never let herself feel too comfortable. That morning, Aylin had woken earlier than usual, as the rest of the train was still preparing for the day. She had been walking alongside the edge of a shallow creek, washing her hands and face and enjoying a rare moment of calm. The water was cold, and it brought a shiver, but also a sense of clarity. She took a deep breath and let the sound of the flowing stream fill her senses. For a moment she allowed herself to feel safe, thinking of nothing more than the small birds that darted from tree to tree and the gentle hum of insects around the water. When she turned to follow the wagons back to the trail, she realized something was wrong. The wagons had already moved farther down the path. Her heart raced as she hurried toward them, her feet kicking up dust that clung to her bare ankles. She shouted, calling to anyone who might hear her, but the voices of the travelers were faint in the distance. The wagons continued slowly onward, unaware, or perhaps too busy, to notice that someone had fallen behind. Panic began to creep into Island's chest. Being left behind in this vast open land was dangerous. The plain stretched for miles with no immediate shelter, and she knew that wild animals, exposure to the sun, and the possibility of hostile strangers were all real threats. Her mind raced through the options. She could try to run to catch up, but the wagons were moving steadily, and she would not be able to match their pace for long. Turning back or finding another path could lead her deeper into unknown territory. Either way, she realized that she would have to rely entirely on herself to survive. Island paused for a moment, taking stock of her surroundings. The sun had climbed higher, making the shadows of the small hills shorter. The wind blew dry and warm across the plains, carrying the scent of dust and distant sagebrush. She looked around, hoping for a sign of the wagon train, but all she could see were the long tracks in the dirt, fading into the distance. A sense of loneliness settled over her, heavier than any fear she had felt before. The world suddenly seemed too large, and she felt small, almost invisible in the vast openness. But Aylin was not one to give in to despair. She took a deep breath and reminded herself of the skills that had carried her this far. And she knew how to find water, how to read the land for signs of animals, and how to move quietly to avoid danger. Her hands, calloused from years of work in her village, were steady as she reached into her pack and checked the small amount of food she had managed to carry. There were a few dried fruits, some nuts, and a small piece of bread. It was not much, but it was enough to last her a day if she rationed it carefully. She began walking in the direction she thought the wagons had gone, keeping the tracks in sight. The ground was uneven and rocky, and every step sent small stones tumbling down the hillsides. Her muscles ached from the sudden rush to catch up, but she pushed forward, knowing that stopping would only make her situation worse. With each step she repeated quiet words to herself, a mantra of determination and courage that had been passed down through her family for generations. I am strong. I will survive. I will not be afraid. As the day wore on, Island's eyes scanned the horizon constantly. She saw the distant shapes of the wagons far ahead, but they were moving steadily away from her. She shouted again, hoping someone would hear, but the wind carried her voice away. Her stomach rumbled, reminding her that she needed food, and the hot sun made her feel dizzy at times. Sweat ran down her face and dust clung to her skin, making her clothes stiff and uncomfortable. Still, she pressed on, driven by determination and the knowledge that giving up was not an option. By late afternoon, Aylin realized she could not continue chasing the wagons. The distance was too great, and her energy was running low. She needed to find shelter before nightfall, or the cold desert night would be unbearable. She spotted a small cluster of trees near a dry creek bed and decided to rest there for a while. The shade offered some relief from the sun, and she drank the last of her water slowly, savoring each drop. Sitting quietly, she tried to calm her mind, knowing that panic would only make her situation more difficult. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, the shadows lengthened, and Aylin felt the first hints of fear creeping back. The plains, which had seemed so empty and peaceful earlier, now felt vast and threatening. Every sound, the rustle of leaves, the distant cry of a bird, the movement of small animals, made her heart race. She wrapped herself in her blanket and tried to make herself as small and hidden as possible. Her thoughts drifted to her family, to the people she had left behind, and to the uncertainty of what tomorrow might bring. Despite the fear, Aylin refused to give in. She knew that survival required both courage and careful thought. She examined the area for potential dangers, noting places where she could hide if necessary and small depressions in the ground where she could rest. She used her knowledge of tracking to look for signs of other travelers or animals nearby. Every instinct she had learned over the years guided her as she prepared for the night. She reminded herself again that she was strong, capable, and resourceful, even if she felt alone. As darkness fell, the sky turned a deep shade of blue, and the first stars began to appear. Aylin lay quietly, listening to the sounds of the night. It was a lonely, uncomfortable night, but she survived by keeping her mind focused on the tasks at hand, staying alert, finding shelter, and conserving energy. Though she had been left behind, she felt a quiet pride in her ability to endure and adapt. The world was unpredictable, but she was ready to face it. Before drifting off to sleep, Aylin allowed herself a small hope. Perhaps tomorrow would bring help. Perhaps the wagon train would return, or another traveler might come along. Even in the vast, empty plains, she understood that life was full of possibilities, and survival often required patience as much as strength. With that thought, she closed her eyes, letting the quiet night surround her, and prepared for whatever challenges the next day might bring. The next morning, the plains were bathed in a soft, pale light. Aylin awoke to the quiet sounds of birds and the gentle breeze rustling through the sparse trees around her. The night had been cold, and her blanket offered only minimal comfort. She stretched, feeling the stiffness in her limbs, and reminded herself that she could not linger any longer. Survival required movement, careful planning, and alertness. She had survived the first night alone, but she knew that the next day could be even more challenging. After a simple breakfast of the remaining nuts and dried fruits in her small pack, Aylin began walking again. She scanned the horizon constantly, searching for any sign of life or movement. The vastness of the land was intimidating. Rolling hills stretched endlessly, dotted with tufts of grass and small clusters of trees, but there was no sign of the wagon train she had been following. Every step reminded her that she was truly alone. Yet, despite the fear and uncertainty, she felt a growing sense of determination. Aylin had survived difficult situations before, and she trusted in her ability to endure. As she walked, she noticed the land changing. The flat plains were giving way to rocky outcrops and small hills. The terrain was more difficult to navigate, but it also offered opportunities to find water, shelter, and food. She carefully examined the ground for animal tracks and signs of predators. Every instinct she had learned from her Apache upbringing guided her steps. Her sharp eyes caught the movement of a small rabbit darting across the grass, and she silently admired its speed and alertness. Survival, she knew, required the same combination of caution, observation, and quick thinking. By mid-morning, Aylin felt the first pangs of hunger more sharply. The small amount of food she had rationed the previous day was gone, and she had no way of replenishing it immediately. She searched for edible plants and berries, careful not to touch anything unfamiliar or potentially dangerous. Her knowledge of the land guided her hands, and she found a few small berries that were safe to eat. They were bitter, but they gave her the energy to continue. She also collected a few more nuts that had fallen from nearby trees. Every small find felt like a small victory, a reminder that she could survive on her own if necessary. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Island began to feel the heat and the dryness of the plains pressing down on her. Sweat ran down her face and dust clung to her skin. She shaded her eyes and scanned the horizon again. It was then that she saw something unusual. A figure was moving in the distance, a man on horseback, approaching at a steady pace. Her heart leapt with both hope and caution. She had no idea whether he was friend or foe. Her instincts told her to hide, but curiosity and the possibility of help made her stay in view. The man came closer, and Aylin could see that he was tall, with broad shoulders and a stern expression. His clothes were dusty, and he carried the tools of a rancher, a rope coiled over his shoulder, and a leather satchel at his side. He rode with confidence, as if he knew this land intimately. Island's first reaction was to step back into the trees, keeping herself partially hidden, but the man's gaze seemed calm and careful, not threatening. When he finally spoke, his voice was low but firm. "You there," he said. "Are you alone?" Aylin hesitated. She had been alone for a long time, and the thought of meeting a stranger was frightening. But something in the man's voice suggested honesty. She nodded slightly, not trusting her voice yet. The man dismounted from his horse, moving slowly and deliberately so as not to startle her. "My name is Caleb Montgomery," he said. "I run a ranch not far from here. You look like you've had a rough night. Come with me. I can help you." Island studied him carefully. He was older than she had first guessed, with lines on his face that spoke of experience and hardship. His eyes were sharp, but they held a quiet kindness that made her hesitate less. She weighed her options quickly. Staying in the open plains meant exposure to the elements and potential danger. Accepting his help might lead to safety. She took a deep breath and nodded, signaling that she would go with him. Caleb smiled faintly, not in a boastful way, but in a reassuring one. "Good," he said. "We'll take it slow. You'll ride with me on the horse or walk beside me. It's your choice." Aylin chose to walk beside him, feeling that she needed to stay connected to the land she knew and not lose her balance on an unfamiliar animal. As they moved together, Caleb spoke sparingly, asking simple questions about her journey and her well-being. Aylin answered cautiously, revealing only what she thought was necessary. She did not yet trust him fully, but she appreciated the steady presence he offered. The journey to the ranch took most of the day. Caleb's knowledge of the land was evident. He guided her along paths that offered shade and water, avoiding areas he knew to be dangerous or difficult to cross. Aylin admired his skill, but she also noticed that he did not rush her. Every step seemed calculated, careful, and respectful of her pace. They spoke little, but the quiet moments were filled with understanding. Both of them were aware of the other's presence, and there was a sense of cautious trust beginning to form. By late afternoon, the ranch came into view. It was a modest property, with wooden fences, a few barns, and grazing cattle. Smoke rose from the chimney of a small house, and the sound of animals moving about created a sense of life and stability. Aylin felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. She had never been on a ranch before, and the world of Caleb's home was unfamiliar to her. But she also felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps here she could find safety and rest. Caleb led her to the house and offered her water and a simple meal. She sat quietly, observing the neatness of the space and the care with which he prepared the food. It was a different world from the harsh plains she had navigated alone, but she could sense the order and purpose behind it. As she ate, she realized how hungry she truly was, and the warmth of the food reminded her of something she had missed during her time on the trail: comfort and security, even if only temporary. After the meal, Caleb showed her around the ranch. He introduced her to the animals and explained some of the daily routines, but he did so with patience, never rushing her to understand everything at once. Aylin listened carefully, absorbing what she could. She asked questions when necessary, and Caleb answered them honestly, showing her that he respected her curiosity and intelligence. It was a slow process, But Island began to feel a sense of belonging, even if it was cautious and tentative. As evening approached, Island realized she had survived more than just the day. She had met a stranger who offered her help, and she had accepted it, despite her fears. The plains behind her were vast and lonely, but the ranch in front of her promised shelter, guidance, and perhaps even the chance to rebuild some measure of trust in people. She did not know what the future held, but for the first time in days, she allowed herself a small sense of hope. As she prepared to sleep in the small guest room Caleb had offered, she thought about the events that had brought her here. Being left behind by the wagon train had been terrifying, but it had also led her to this place, a place where she might find not only safety, but also a new understanding of the world beyond the plains. She lay quietly listening to the sounds of the ranch at night, the soft lowing of cattle, the rustle of the wind through the trees, and the distant hoot of an owl. For the first time in a long while, she felt a quiet peace. Ayla knew that trust was fragile and that the road ahead would not be easy. But she also knew that courage, resilience, and careful observation had carried her this far, and they would continue to guide her. Tomorrow, she would begin learning the ways of the ranch, discovering the skills Caleb expected of her, and testing the boundaries of her own strength. But tonight, she allowed herself to rest, knowing that she had survived the first part of her journey alone, and that she had taken the first step toward a new life, one that might bring unexpected friendship, guidance, and even a sense of family. The next morning, the ranch was bathed in soft golden light. Island woke early, the sounds of animals stirring outside filling the small room where she had slept. Chickens clucked and scratched at the ground, the horses in their pens shifted and nicked at the hay, and a distant cow lowed in the pasture. Everything was alive and moving, yet calm in a way she had not felt on the plains. She stretched and ran her hands over her face, trying to shake off the stiffness from the long day before. Caleb was already awake when she stepped outside. He was tending to the horses, brushing their coats with careful, practiced strokes. He looked up as she approached and gave a small nod. "Morning," he said. His voice was calm, without any sharpness or judgment. Island nodded in return, unsure of how much to say. She had spent the previous day observing, learning, and listening. Today she would begin her real work. The first tasks were simple but necessary. Caleb showed her how to carry feed to the animals, how to refill the water troughs, and how to check the fences for breaks. Aylin followed his instructions carefully, trying not to make mistakes. She noticed that Caleb did not rush her, even when her movements were slow or uncertain. There was patience in him, something rare in the people she had encountered before. It made her feel cautious, but also slightly more comfortable. By mid-morning, the work grew more demanding. Caleb asked her to help with the milking of cows, a task she had never done before. She watched him closely as he demonstrated, noting the rhythm and care required to complete the work without hurting the animals. Her first attempts were clumsy, and milk splattered on her hands and clothes. Caleb only smiled faintly and corrected her gently. "Relax your hands," he said. "Move with the cow, not against it. They can feel your fear." Island followed his advice and gradually found a rhythm. Each cow had its own personality, and she learned to read their subtle movements. She noticed which ones were nervous and which were calm, adjusting her technique accordingly. By the end of the morning, she had milked several cows with little spillage and felt a small sense of pride. Caleb observed quietly, but she caught the brief flash of approval in his eyes. After the morning chores, they paused for a simple meal of bread, cheese, and fresh water. Island ate slowly, savoring the flavors, and felt a little stronger with each bite. Caleb ate in silence, watching her carefully but not intruding. He asked a few questions about her past life in her village, about the skills she had learned, and about her family. Island answered cautiously, careful not to reveal too much too soon. She was learning that trust grew slowly, and even a kind gesture could not erase past pain. In the afternoon, Caleb asked her to help with repairing a fence that had been damaged in a recent storm. The task was hard, requiring lifting heavy wooden posts, hammering nails, and bending to mend broken sections. Island worked steadily, sweat running down her face and dust coating her clothes. It was exhausting, but the work demanded focus, and she found that her mind could quiet itself in concentration. Caleb worked alongside her, offering advice when necessary and stepping back to allow her to find her own rhythm. As the sun climbed higher, the wind shifted, carrying the scents of dry grass and the distant creek. Eileen realized that her body was stronger than she had remembered. The physical work, though challenging, gave her a sense of control and purpose. She had survived days of uncertainty and fear on the plains, but here, she could see the results of her effort immediately. A repaired fence, a full water trough, and animals fed and cared for, all of it reminded her that she could contribute, that she was capable of more than mere survival. Caleb observed quietly as the hours passed, speaking only when necessary. Yet, Eileen could sense his attention. He was assessing her abilities, but also giving her space to grow. She realized that he respected her, even if he did not say so outright. That realization brought a small warmth to her chest, a rare comfort she had not felt in weeks. She wondered if trust could grow here, in this place filled with hard work, patience, and careful observation. By late afternoon, they moved to a different task, mending the roof of a small barn. The work was risky, and Eileen felt fear rise in her chest as she climbed the ladder with Caleb's guidance. "Take it slow," he said. "Watch your footing and remember the steps. You've done hard work before. You can do this." His words were steady and encouraging, not pushy or demanding. Eileen took a deep breath and climbed carefully, placing each foot with intention. The roof was repaired slowly but successfully, and she felt a surge of accomplishment when the last nail was in place. As evening approached, the ranch seemed to exhale. The animals were fed, the chores completed, and the sun began its descent behind the hills. The sky turned shades of pink and gold, and Eileen paused to take in the view. It was peaceful in a way that she had never experienced before. The plains had been harsh and lonely, but here, there was a rhythm to life, a balance between work and rest, danger and safety. She felt the first real hint of belonging in a long time. Caleb called her to dinner, a simple meal of stew and fresh bread. Eileen sat at the wooden table, feeling the warmth of the fire and the comfort of the room. They ate in silence at first, then spoke quietly about the day's work. Caleb asked about her thoughts and feelings, not just her physical work. "You handled the cows well today," he said. "I can see you're learning quickly. But it's not just the work, it's how you approach it, how you think about it. That matters even more." Eileen listened, feeling a small but important sense of pride. His words were not empty praise. They were recognition of her effort and intelligence. For the first time, she felt that she was not just surviving, but also growing, learning, and becoming part of something larger than herself. The ranch, the animals, and even Caleb's quiet presence offered her a new perspective on life, a life that could be steady, purposeful, and connected. After dinner, Caleb suggested a walk around the property. The evening air was cool, and the sky filled with stars. Eileen walked beside him, feeling the land under her feet and noticing the details. The way the wind moved through the trees, the sounds of animals settling for the night, and the distant hills that framed the horizon. It was a different world from the plain she had traveled alone. It was safer, yes, but it also offered something more valuable: structure, understanding, and a chance to rebuild trust. As they returned to the house, Caleb spoke quietly. "You'll get used to this," he said. "It's hard at first. Life here is steady, but it's not easy. You'll make mistakes, but that's okay. You're learning, and that's what matters." Eileen nodded, feeling the weight of his words. She understood that survival was not just about facing danger. It was about learning, adapting, and growing in a world that could be both harsh and kind. Before going to sleep, Eileen reflected on the day. She had learned so much: how to milk cows, mend fences, repair a roof, and navigate a new way of life. She had also observed Caleb, noticing his patience, quiet strength, and respect. Trust was not given freely, but she was beginning to understand how it could grow. She felt a mix of exhaustion, pride, and cautious hope. The journey ahead would be long, but she was no longer entirely alone. Lying in her small room, Eileen allowed herself to think about what had brought her here. Being left behind by the wagon train had been frightening, but it had led her to this ranch, to a man who offered guidance, and to a place where her skills and courage were valued. The plains had taught her survival, but the ranch offered something more: the possibility of belonging, purpose, and even quiet peace. As the night deepened, Eileen drifted to sleep with a sense of calm she had not felt in weeks. She knew the days ahead would be filled with work, challenges, and learning, but she also understood that she could meet them. Strength, resilience, and careful observation had carried her this far, and they would continue to guide her. For the first time in a long time, she felt that she was not just surviving, she was living, and that made all the difference. The next morning, the ranch was quiet, but Aylin could feel an unease in the air. She had grown accustomed to the rhythm of the daily chores, the sound of the animals, the wind through the trees, the distant hills. But something felt different today. The birds were quieter than usual, and the horses shifted nervously in their pens. Aylin shook off the feeling, telling herself it was probably just her imagination. Yet her instincts, honed over years of surviving in the open plains, told her to pay attention. By mid-morning, the quiet was broken by the sound of shouting in the distance. Aylin froze, her heart racing. She scanned the horizon and saw a group of men approaching the ranch, moving quickly and with purpose. They were armed, though not in a way that made her panic immediately. These were not soldiers, but travelers with uncertain intentions. She could see their eyes focused on the ranch, and her stomach tightened. Danger had arrived, and she realized that survival required action, not hesitation. Caleb was the first to notice them clearly. He moved with a calm urgency, calling out to Aylin, "Get the animals inside the pens! Close all gates! We need to be ready." His voice was steady, but there was a firmness that left no room for argument. Aylin acted immediately, running to help herd the horses and cattle into secure pens. Her hands moved quickly, her mind alert to every movement. She had learned from the plains how to act under pressure, how to stay calm when the situation was dangerous. The skills she had practiced alone now became vital. The men reached the edge of the property shouting demands. They wanted supplies, livestock, and anything of value they could carry. Caleb stepped forward, placing himself between them and the animals. "You won't take anything," he said firmly. His presence was commanding, but Aylin could see the tension in his shoulders. He was ready to defend the ranch, but he was also aware of the risk. Aylin stayed close behind him, her eyes scanning for any opportunity to help. She noticed the men were disorganized, not well trained. Their threat was serious, but manageable, with quick thinking and careful action. Aylin remembered the skills she had used on the plains: how to move quietly, how to read the land, how to anticipate actions before they happened. She signaled to Caleb and moved toward the smaller barn where tools and supplies were kept. Using her knowledge of the terrain, she created a simple distraction. She kicked up dust and noise in one direction while positioning herself near a gate that could be closed quickly. Her movements were precise, deliberate, and unnoticed by the intruders. Caleb reacted immediately, following her lead without needing instructions. He blocked the men's approach, using his presence and voice to redirect their attention. The combination of his authority and Aylin's quick thinking confused the intruders just enough for Caleb to close the gate behind them. The animals were safe, the property secure, and the men realized they could not easily take what they wanted. Frustrated, they retreated, shouting threats but unable to force their way in. Once the danger had passed, Aylin felt her chest heaving, both from fear and adrenaline. She had acted quickly, using her skills and instincts, and had helped protect the ranch. Caleb turned to her, his eyes showing a mix of relief and admiration. "You did well," he said. "Very well. You saved us more than once today." Aylin felt a small warmth spread through her chest. For the first time, her abilities were recognized and appreciated in a way that felt meaningful. The rest of the day passed in a tense quiet. Caleb checked the fences, the pens, and the animals repeatedly, making sure everything was secure. Aylin stayed close, helping where needed and observing how he managed the ranch under pressure. She realized that his calm, steady approach came from experience, but it was also guided by respect for the land and the life it supported. She admired his strength and patience, and she felt a growing trust in him, not just for survival, but as a companion in the work of life. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Caleb suggested a break. They sat together on the porch of the house, looking out over the fields. Aylin could feel her muscles ache from the morning's exertion, but there was also a sense of pride in her work. She had faced danger, acted decisively, and contributed to the safety of the ranch. Caleb watched her quietly, his gaze thoughtful. "You're learning quickly," he said. "Not just the work, but how to handle what life throws at you. That matters more than anything else." Aylin nodded, feeling the weight of his words. She understood that life on the ranch was not just about feeding animals or fixing fences. It was about observing, anticipating, and acting with wisdom and care. Survival was not enough. One had to live with awareness, respect, and intention. She realized that she had grown stronger, not just physically, but also mentally and emotionally, since arriving at the ranch. As evening approached, a gentle wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scents of dry grass and wood smoke. Aylin and Caleb prepared a simple meal together, working in quiet coordination. They chopped vegetables, stirred a pot of stew, and set the table with care. The act of sharing a meal after a day of tension brought a sense of normalcy and comfort. Aylin appreciated the routine, the steady rhythm of work and rest, and the way it grounded her after the chaos of the morning. After dinner, Caleb suggested a walk to check the perimeter of the property. The sky was filled with stars, and the moon cast a silver light over the fields. They moved slowly, speaking in soft tones. Caleb asked her about her thoughts, her feelings, and her past experiences. Aylin answered carefully, sharing only what felt safe, but she felt a growing connection. He listened without judgment, showing patience and understanding. For the first time, she felt that she could speak freely without fear of criticism or harm. The walk also gave Aylin an opportunity to reflect on her journey. She had been left behind by the wagon train, faced the vast empty plains, and survived alone. Now she was part of a ranch, working alongside a man who respected her abilities and intelligence. The contrast was striking, but it also brought clarity. She understood that life offered challenges, but it also offered guidance, support, and the chance to grow. She felt a quiet gratitude for the circumstances that had led her here, even though they had begun with fear and uncertainty. By the time they returned to the house, the night was deep and still. The animals had settled, the wind had softened, and the stars sparkled overhead. Caleb looked at her and spoke quietly. "You've proven yourself today, not just in the work, but in courage, and thinking ahead, and helping when it mattered most. That counts for more than anything else." Beckhounds. Aylin felt a warmth she had rarely experienced, recognition, respect, and a sense of belonging. She realized that trust, though fragile, could grow through shared experience, courage, and reliability. As she lay down to sleep that night, Aylin reflected on the events of the day. Danger had come unexpectedly, but she had acted with confidence and skill. She had discovered strengths she did not know she possessed, and had begun to understand the value of trust and partnership. Caleb's quiet guidance, patience, and recognition of her abilities had given her a sense of purpose and hope. She understood that life on the ranch would bring new challenges, but she felt ready to face them. Aylin's thoughts drifted to the future. The plains behind her had been harsh and unforgiving, but they had taught her resilience, independence, and quick thinking. The ranch offered something more: a steady rhythm, safety, and the opportunity to grow. She knew that she would continue learning, facing challenges, and proving herself. But for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of peace. She was not just surviving, she was contributing, learning, and beginning to belong. With that thought, she drifted into sleep, the quiet sounds of the ranch lulling her into rest. The stars shone overhead, the animals rested peacefully, and the wind whispered through the trees. Aylin knew that tomorrow would bring new tasks, new lessons, and perhaps new challenges. But she also knew that she had grown stronger, braver, and wiser. She had faced danger, acted decisively, and helped protect those who had offered her guidance and safety. And for the first time, she felt that she was truly part of something larger, a life filled with purpose, trust, and the quiet promise of belonging. The following morning, the ranch woke to a quiet, steady rhythm. Island rose with the first light, stretching her stiff muscles from the previous day's work. The morning air was cool and fresh, carrying the scent of grass, earth, and animals. She felt a sense of calm she had not experienced during her long journey across the plains. The chaos of being left behind by the wagon train, the uncertainty of survival alone, and the danger from unexpected visitors now felt distant, replaced by a life filled with purpose, routine, and possibility. She stepped outside to see Caleb already preparing for the day. He was feeding the horses, his movements precise and confident. Aylin observed him quietly, appreciating the way he managed the ranch with steady hands and careful thought. Though he seemed reserved, there was a quiet kindness in the way he spoke to the animals and treated the land. She had come to respect not just his strength but his wisdom, and she realized that living alongside him meant learning a new way of life, one where patience, observation, and care mattered as much as physical strength. After a simple breakfast of bread, fruit, and fresh water, Caleb assigned her tasks for the day. It was not just work for survival anymore. There were lessons to be learned, skills to master, and responsibilities to uphold. Island approached each task carefully, remembering the guidance he had given her. She checked the fences, tending to weak spots she had learned to spot through experience. She cleaned the stalls, fed the animals, and even attempted small repairs around the house. Each task reinforced her confidence. She was no longer a stranger in this world. She was part of it, contributing to its care and upkeep. As the day progressed, Caleb introduced her to more complex tasks. They worked together in the fields, repairing irrigation ditches and tending to crops that were just beginning to sprout. Island was tired, but she welcomed the challenge. She had spent so many days in uncertainty and fear that the physical exertion now felt like strength being restored to her body and spirit. She noticed Caleb watching her quietly, his eyes measuring her progress without criticism or harshness. The small nods of acknowledgement he gave her whenever she completed a task correctly were more meaningful than words. During a brief lunch break, Island sat beside Caleb under the shade of a large oak tree. She ate slowly, savoring the simple meal, and allowed herself a moment to reflect. Her journey had been difficult. She had been left behind by the wagon train, forced to survive alone in the harsh, empty plains. She had met strangers whose intentions were unclear, faced danger, and learned to rely only on herself. Yet, through it all, she had grown stronger, wiser, and more confident. She realized that the challenges she had faced were not merely hardships. They were lessons that had prepared her for this new life. Caleb broke the silence. "You've come a long way," he said quietly. "I've seen many people pass through this land, but not many learn as quickly as you have. You understand more than just the work. You understand what it takes to live here." His words were gentle, but they carried weight. Island looked at him, seeing a depth of respect that made her chest warm. She had spent so long guarding herself, unsure whom to trust, and now she understood that Caleb's acknowledgement was genuine. It was a quiet form of recognition, a sign that she belonged here, at least in part. The afternoon brought more challenges. A sudden storm rolled in from the distant hills, and dark clouds covered the sky. Rain began to fall in heavy sheets, and the wind whipped across the fields. Island and Caleb moved quickly to secure the animals, bring tools and supplies inside, and protect the crops from damage. The storm was intense, but together they managed. Island's familiarity with the land and quick thinking proved invaluable. She guided the horses into sheltered pens, covered vulnerable plants, and helped keep the animals calm. Caleb worked alongside her, his calm presence steadying her own nerves. By evening, the storm had passed, leaving the air fresh and clean. The fields glistened with rain, and the animals were safe. Alan felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She had faced both natural and human challenges, and had contributed meaningfully to their resolution. For the first time, she understood what it meant to be part of a community, not just living for herself, but living alongside others with shared responsibilities and mutual care. She realized that the ranch was not just a place of work, it was a place of learning, growth, and connection. Dinner that night was quiet but filled with a sense of calm achievement. Aylin and Caleb ate together, speaking in soft tones about the day's events. Caleb praised her resourcefulness, patience, and courage. "You've earned your place here," he said. "Not just because of the work you do, but because of how you approach it, with thought, care, and determination. That's what matters most." Aylin felt a wave of gratitude and pride. She had begun this journey as a stranger, uncertain and cautious. Now she felt a sense of belonging that she had not thought possible only weeks before. After dinner, Caleb suggested a walk around the property. The sky was clear, and the moon shone brightly over the fields. Aylin followed him, walking through the paths she had learned to navigate with confidence. The land felt familiar now, not empty or threatening as it had during her time alone on the plains. Each step reinforced her sense of connection, to the ranch, to the animals, and to the man who had offered her guidance and protection. As they walked, Caleb spoke quietly about the history of the ranch, the challenges he had faced, and his hopes for the future. Aylin listened carefully, appreciating his openness and feeling a growing respect and understanding for him. The night deepened, and they returned to the house. Aylin felt a sense of quiet reflection settle over her. Her journey had begun with fear and uncertainty, but it had led her to a place where she could grow, learn, and belong. She thought of the wagon train that had left her behind and realized that being abandoned had, in a way, been a blessing. It had forced her to rely on herself, discover her strengths, and ultimately led her to Caleb and the ranch. She allowed herself to feel gratitude for the difficult path that had brought her here. Before going to sleep, Aylin sat quietly by the window, looking out at the moonlit fields. She thought of the challenges she had overcome, the loneliness of the plains, the threat of danger, the fear of the unknown. She also thought of the skills she had developed, the lessons she had learned, and the trust she had begun to build with Caleb. She understood that life would continue to present challenges, but she now felt prepared to meet them. Strength, courage, and careful observation had brought her this far, and they would continue to guide her in the future. As sleep approached, Aylin felt a sense of peace she had not known for a long time. The ranch had become more than a place of safety. It had become a home. Caleb had become more than a guide. He had become a companion in this shared life. She felt a quiet hope that the days ahead would bring growth, understanding, and continued trust. She knew that she had come a long way, from being abandoned on the plains to finding purpose and belonging, and she allowed herself to embrace that accomplishment fully. The following days passed with steady rhythm. Aylin continued to learn, grow, and contribute. She developed a deep understanding of the land, the animals, and the routines necessary to maintain the ranch. Her confidence grew with each task completed, each challenge faced, and each small success acknowledged. Caleb continued to guide her, sometimes offering instruction, sometimes observing silently, but always allowing her to discover her own abilities. Their partnership deepened, built on respect, trust, and shared experience. Over time, Aylin realized that she had begun to form a new sense of family. She and Caleb were not related by blood, but their bond was shaped by mutual care, shared effort, and quiet understanding. The ranch became a place where she could belong, a space where her skills and courage were valued, and a life where she could continue to grow. She reflected on the journey that had brought her here, understanding that the trials she had faced had prepared her for this life in ways she could not have imagined. In the evenings, after the work was done, Aylin and Caleb would sit quietly, often speaking of hopes, plans, and lessons learned. The ranch had become a place of security but also of reflection and understanding. Aylin knew that life would continue to present challenges, but she no longer faced them alone. She had learned to trust, to rely on her skills, and to find strength in collaboration. Each day brought new experiences, and with them, new opportunities to grow and contribute. Finally, Aylin understood what it meant to belong somewhere, to be valued, and to feel purpose. The ranch, Caleb, and the life they had built together represented not just survival, but living fully, with courage, skill, and connection. She had been left behind once, but that abandonment had led her to a life filled with learning, trust, and quiet hope. She looked forward to the future with confidence, knowing that she could face whatever challenges came her way. and that she was no longer alone.